Hello and welcome. Another edition of The Process, not our process, your process. And we're really excited to be back to talk about all things related to nutrition, supplementation, meal prep, all of those topics. Again, the head CEO of Corvive, Jeremy Fouts, joins me every week. But Jeremy, we're going to talk about a hot topic today, and I know you're excited to get into this one.
Absolutely, Walter. This is something I, as a parent, actually fell into the same trap and had to be, really conscious of not falling into this trap several times. And we're going to be talking today why training and nutrition matter more than showcasing at a young age. And not just showcasing, it's also we get emotionally and financially caught up in how many travel tournaments our kids are doing. And I know you see this at age 11 and 12. I mean, playing every weekend. And Walter, when I started with my boys when they was young in select ball at 7, yes, we played some select ball, but it was a few tournaments in the spring. Now it goes from spring. I was watching on Instagram yesterday. Teams are still playing in middle of December. They're playing tournaments all year round. Not that competition. We'll talk about that. You and I will agree. It's good for these athletes to have some competition and some experience. But how much better would our athlete be, Walter, if we split a lot of times on those weekends of training strength and speed and teaching them how to meal prep and getting them ready to really be able to have something to showcase? I know you and I was talking about a friend of ours, Kevin Popey, with the Chicago Cubs, and he mentioned out the MLB meetings this week, and him and I was having this conversation. He's like, "Why would I take a 10-year-old F-150 to a car show?" He goes, "There's nothing to show, right?" And so I think us parents, when we're excited about our athlete, and we definitely think Johnny's better than what he is, right? We put the focus on the wrong things, not because we don't love Johnny. We think we're doing the right thing. But that's why I'm excited about today's topic, is to try to help some of these parents that really just don't know. You live this life, you see it every day working with families, and just making sure that we have things in check here. Is our son really ready to be showcased, or do we need to spend more time on nutrition, strength training, speed training, the things that's going to get them ready to be showcased correctly?
You know, this is a topic that is extremely near and dear to my heart, and I always tell a story of Rich Gedman, a longtime member of the Boston Red Sox, and I've known Rich. He played at St. Peter Marion in Worcester, Massachusetts. He's now a AAA manager with the Boston Red Sox in Worcester, with the Woo Sox. But he's played for many years with the Red Sox at the major league level. Caught guys like Roger Clemens. And one of the things that Rich said to me as a dad at a very early part of my youngest son Tyler's process was, you need to make sure you get Tyler with a strength coach that understands nutrition, and you need to start that yesterday. Now, this is when Tyler was 12 years old. And so, much to Jeremy's point, we have a lot of parents that really want to see where their or how their student athlete measures up with regard to not only a state or regional level, but they want to see it on a national level. And so, one of the biggest areas that is misunderstood and underappreciated is at what age to start the proper nutrition, and that goes with the supplementation. And there's no such thing as magic in a pill. There's no such thing as magic in a powder. It has to be a part. That's why they use the word supplementation. You have to have the good meal prep. So, Jeremy, let's start there. A lot of parents will always say, does it really matter if my student athlete, starts a nutrition plan at 12 or 13 years old? Isn't that a little young? Well, that's when they're hitting their massive growth spurts. That's when their physical presence begins to change. So let's start there. At what ages are you really, thinking that it's best for parents to get involved with regard to Corvive or your meal type process, as far as prep is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on the maturity of the athlete and the commitment from mom and dad. Okay. It thrills my soul, Walter, when I get messages on social media of parents that have 8-year-old kids that message me and say, "Hey, can you run their calories, what they're I mean, so think about this though. When you and I was 8, we might have played a couple ball games. The 8-year-olds now, they're playing so much ball, right?
Right.
Now, do I think an 8-year-old needs to be on a strict meal plan? No. But do I think it is very educational for an athlete and a parent to know when they have a plate of food on their kitchen table, how much is proteins, and what does proteins do? I had 3 consults yesterday with athletes ranging from 15 to 17. I asked all 3 of them, "Do you know what your BMR is?" They said, "No." I asked all 3 of them, "Do you know what your TDEE is?" Which those of you listening for the first time, BMR is basal metabolic rate, how many calories you burn at rest. TDEE is total daily energy expenditure, how many total calories you're burning with all of your activity levels. Then I asked all 3 of them, "Do you know what protein does?" They said, "No." I said, "Protein builds muscle, helps muscle recover." "Do you know what carbs do?" "No." "That's your fuel source to make sure you're going to have enough glycogen in your system to push the weights you need to be able to do, to be able to train with speed training." "Do you know what fats do?" "No." "It helps with your hormone levels, increasing your testosterone, helping your brain development." So getting back to that 8-year-old, I love it when a mom and dad is sitting down with that athlete. Here's how much proteins, here's how much carbs, here's how much, and that needs to be fun. Now, when they become 10, 11, 12-year old, if they're pretty mature 12-year-old, I think it's time to really get things dialed into as far as, okay, you're burning 2,200 calories a day. We need to be eating 2,700 calories a day. Okay, we need to start off at 1 gram of protein per body weight. Okay, we need to have this many carbs because you're doing this much activity. We need to have this percentage of your calories consumed in your fats. Here's why, because going through puberty right now, if we get our fats dialed in correctly, it's going to help you be able to go through puberty the correct way. We're getting all of our calcium through our micronutrients from our foods we're eating. Here's why that's important. The bone density, we don't want fractures later on in life. So if an athlete is mature enough, when they start hitting 12, 13, it's very important. If they're training, I mentioned in the last episode, your body already produces 1 to 2 grams of creatine a day. You're getting around 1 to 2 grams from your meats. But now's time. If they're training hard, they have their nutrition dialed in. Let's start introducing them what 3 grams of creatine can do on top of that. Let's educate them about the electrolytes, why they need the electrolytes, why we're going to stay away from Body Armor and Gatorade, from all the dyes and the different things that's not good for their system. I had an athlete, I asked athletes what their favorite foods are, and one of them put in their Body Armor and Gatorade. And I hope this don't get me in trouble, but I got to tell the truth. That's all it is, right? And I typed them up a whole 1-page report talking about why, as a sports certified nutritionist, I cannot recommend that. And the mom said when the son was reading it, his eyes was this big around, said, "Get me some core beef hydrate," or I'll just drink water or whatever. So 12 and 13 is, I think, the ideal time. Now, Walter, is all 12 and 13-year-olds going to follow that plan to a T and do everything correctly? No. But here's what they're doing, Walter. They're starting the process.
Right.
They're starting the process of figuring out what foods help their bodies perform the best. How God put food here as a fuel source to be able to give us the vitamins and minerals we need. How choosing the Skittles is empty calories, and that's not going to help me perform. So the process of starting at 12 and 13, I know you mentioned an athlete before we started the episode, of an athlete you started with when he was 12, 13. You're showing me pictures what he's like at 15. If we can capture them at 12 or 13 with educating them on the power of nutrition, it's going to set them way apart from every other athlete.
I've always tried to get parents to understand, the sports world, the youth sports world really is setting a one big mousetrap. And they know that most parents that maybe don't have an athletic background, don't have resources that they can tap into to kind of educate themselves, they fall into this trap. hey, Michael Jordan and all of these athletes, they drink Gatorade. Well, but that's not necessarily true. They are endorsers and they obviously promote. But one of the biggest traps that all of the youth sports leagues around the country, I call it the hamster wheel. And they want to get you to think, okay, lessons. And then they want you to seek out higher levels of competition. And then they want you to go into the showcases. And then they want you to go into the tournaments. And it's like one vicious, wheel that you begin to chase. And the carrot that gets dangled is college scholarships. But the reality is, and this is why the process, your process is so critical, is that 9 out of 10 high school athletes, they won't play beyond high school. But what does nutrition really bring to the table with your athlete? It brings from an academic component, mental clarity. It teaches the priority of restorative sleep, hydration. Now, when Jeremy talks, and I really want you to start here now with regard to hydration, the water bottle. What athlete doesn't roll into a practice or a game setting or a tournament setting with either a bottle of Gatorade or a shaker, that has either water or something in there so that they can drink in between games? So let's start with this trap of fast, quick. Here's a piece of pizza. Here's a hot dog. Here's a Gatorade. You think, okay, I'm doing the right thing because they're eating and they're drinking. But at the end of the day, they're missing the bigger point. So let's go there, Jeremy, and talk a little bit about that trap that begins when youth sports begins. There's more to this than just competing and the caliber of competition. It's about making sure your body at
Yep.
these younger ages are truly getting all the necessary vitamins, minerals, all of the things that are necessary for overall growth, not just athletic growth.
Yeah, Walter. College coaches are not recruiting weekend warriors, so to speak. They're
Right.
recruiting physical bodies that
Right.
compete. And yeah, I had a dad call me the other day, awesome dad. And he said, "Hey, my son got an opportunity to go down to Florida to play. He's 12 years old this weekend. It's going to be a financial burden for the family. What would you suggest?" I said, "Hey, give me about 3 hours and watch for your email." He said, "Okay." And so I built them a full schedule starting on Saturday morning of getting up and eating a good breakfast based on what that son needed for his size. And then I told him about a workout to do, to be able to teach his son correct form on squats, not heavy weight. He's just 12, teaching him some different other routines, and then coming back, eating a snack, and then to go get some tea time, some soft toss time. And then after that, come back and get another snack, and then go and get some ground ball and to stretch out the arm. And I said, what you did there in those 4 or 5 hours is spent quality time with your son,
Right.
educating about nutrition, working on skills. He got more at bats in the cage with you than he would have 3 or 4 weekends in a row, and you're able to spend time with him. So, and then while you're in Florida, you're grabbing the hot dog, like you mentioned. You're grabbing the nacho cheese. It's really not cheese, Walter. You're
Right.
grabbing all these different things. Your son is gut is tore up in the bathroom. He's staying up on the weekends because he's in a hotel with his friends. Not that some of those experiences is not good learning experiences, but Walter, we cannot fall into this trap. We've got to be conscious and say, okay, my son is 12, and maybe you have a daughter that's playing softball. I know we don't talk about that. Those female softball players, Walter, they play tons more games than these boys do. I don't know if you're recognize that or not, but just making sure we don't fall into this trap of thinking we have to play every weekend, and then we let our nutrition. From 0 to 2 is the most growth that you will ever see, your athlete will ever see. The next time is from 12 to 18, and that is the most precious time to making sure that we're giving our body everything that it needs to grow properly, to make sure that we're not calorie deficit, which sets us up at risk for REDS, which stands for relative energy deficiency in sport, which is a big issue, from affecting hormones to affecting your IGF-1, your bone density. And we just got to be smart as parents and say, yes, weekends are great for the boys and the girls to learn about competition. But when do we really recognize what is the main priority here? And I'm telling you, nutrition, strength training, speed, and just good fundamental skills on the weekend is powerful for a youth athlete.
We're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about with Jeremy. We often think about sports with regard to whether it's baseball or softball, but in reality, nutrition is a really big deal, as Jeremy alluded to, with regard to growth. Being able to make sure you're hitting those max with regard to height and strength and weight and so forth. We're going to talk about that after we hear from this brief message.
All proteins are not the same. I encourage you to choose a grass-fed whey protein. The cattle have a cleaner diet, grazing on natural grass, which is going to mean that it's going to have higher branched chain amino acids, also your omegas and your CLAs. I'm telling you, it matters from a recovery standpoint. Choose the best protein and you're going to see the best gains and the best recovery. I'm telling you, athletes, make a wise choice because it matters what you put in your body.
Jeremy, a lot of times we as parents are always seeking, that information that really will kind of push our athletes forward, especially at the younger levels. And you had mentioned, you have girls soccer, you have girls lacrosse, ice hockey. There's a lot of sports, not just baseball and softball, that young athletes will benefit from with regard to the nutrition and the all of the meal planning and so forth. What are some of the biggest gaps that you feel that parents face, at that 12 to 13-year-old time period when growth really is about to hit that next level, really where we're starting to see growth height wise, physical wise? What are some of the gaps that they can look for to be able to fill in that it should be at the forefront for every single parent?
Yeah, well, when I'm working with parents, Walter, I always like talking to them first off about that son or that daughter's mood. How do they feel when they come home? Are they grouchy? Are they not in a good mood? What do they feel like when they waking up? Are they always sore after their competitions? Usually that gives me a good understanding that they are very much in a calorie deficit. Okay, first and foremost. So then I start working with them of getting them in a calorie surplus and then educating them on the power of protein and what protein does, on the power of the carbs and what carbs do, of making sure we're fueling behind after our lifts and before our lifts, understanding also the fats that we talked about earlier with the hormones. But then talking to them about, hey, do you have any idea of how much calcium your son or daughter is getting in their diet every day? How about vitamin K? How about their B12s? And bringing that to their attention that, look, we have got to get to a calorie surplus, but we have to do it with the right macros and the right micronutrients. And here's what's going to happen to your son or your daughter. They're going to sleep amazing. They're going to have amazing workouts. They're going to have amazing recovery, and they're also going to fuel their body properly. It's been proven through different studies, Walter, that the right amount of sleep and the right amount of protein can add up to a couple inches to their linear height.
And that's a big deal. That's a
That's a
big
big
deal.
deal.
Right.
And not only that, it's going to help with their bone density to making sure one of the biggest signs in reds, I mentioned it a few minutes ago, is these athletes that always have lingering injuries. They have a little sprained ankle, they have a little fracture, and then it comes back, and then it comes back. It's because not all the time, but majority of the time, it's because the athlete is not getting their nutrition to recover. Their body basically goes into survival mode and says, you're not giving me enough here. So I'm going to go into survival mode and just shut down this growth factor right now. I'm just going to go into survival mode. And until you give me the right amount of calories, until you give me the right amount of macros and micronutrients, I'm just going to hang out here because I have nothing to work with. So it's everything, Walter. It's everything on the longevity of that athlete becoming the athlete that he or she wants to become.
One of the things that I will always tell parents, and I think it's important to interject here, 12 to 13 years of age. Let's talk about those things. I had a young man, he's now a sophomore in high school. When he was 12, he was devastated. Didn't make the Little League All-Star team. Didn't make the local town, travel for the 13-year-old year, and was really down. And I think at the time he might have been. I'm going to share a picture here in a second. He might have been maybe 4'8", maybe 100 pounds if he had a brick in his back pocket. And Dad came to me and said, "Boy, oh boy, I'm not an athlete. I was a swimmer. Can you help?" And when I went there and I talked to him about your number one priority as a parent is to get him to understand exactly what needs to be done in order to grow. And so I'm just going to share with you a picture. This is a picture from 3 years ago. And his breakfast used to consist of cereal and maybe a bagel, or cereal or a bagel. And I kept trying to say to him, hey, it's important to get that protein. It's important to have that 15 minutes to energize before you go off to school. Well, that young man now, as a 15-year-old, as a sophomore in high school, he is now close to 180 pounds. We had Anthony on a few weeks ago. He's 190. So when we start talking with parents, don't think of this from just an athletic, realm. I want you to kind of widen out the lens and start to think about, Jeremy alluded to, mental clarity, academics, and then socially. If your body is not feeling right, you're going to be cranky. You're not going to really be in a good mood, and you might be, kind of dozing off in class. So this is much deeper than athletics. And it's one of the reasons why I think Jeremy and I really felt that this was a topic that was under discussed and really not a lot of information going out there. So one of the things that I wanted to be able to get parents to understand, Jeremy, if you could, now let's get out of that 12 to 13-year-old window and let's kind of take it into that junior or senior year, because you're living this now as a dad. And I lived it as a dad. And I saw my sons take accountability to what they were putting in their body. And I'm not just talking about supplements or food. It's what they're avoiding. There's a lot that goes on with peer pressure. So talk a little bit about why, when a student athlete learns about what goes into their body and the effects that it has on the body, sometimes that helps them make good decisions as, younger or older teenagers, where they're starting to look around and say, well, that guy might be having a libation or two over here. But putting quality into the body is always going to promote quality output. So talk a little bit about the decisions of what you're teaching at the younger ages and why the payoff occurs when they're in that 17 and 19-year-old window.
Yeah, I mean, great discussion here, Walter. This is something that I always do. I mentioned us doing the micronutrient analysis, and some of my athletes are mature enough to understand it, some are not. But last night I have one that he could probably be a big-time D1 quarterback. He plays baseball as well, 6'3", 170. And I went over the micronutrient analysis and started talking to him about that, and really broke it down for him and started really educating him. The micronutrients is how we feel, all of those things. And he got excited. And he's like, man, so vitamin K does this for me, and B12s do this for me. And I wrote him up a whole report talking about it. And Walter, those 12, 13s, again, they start the process. When they become 15, 16, 17, that's when if they follow this process, I mean, they're not wanting to grab something that they shouldn't be grabbing. I had a conversation with a college boy that I'm working with the other day, and his buddies do what buddies do at colleges on the weekends. He's like, Jeremy, I'm not touching that. And I said, why not? He said, because when you explain to me that that's going to decrease my testosterone level, and when you explain to me that that's going to do no good for me from an athletic standpoint, he's like, why would I want to touch it?
Amen.
Right. And then I've got these other athletes when they're 17, they've been in the process so long. One of them's a pitcher right now. He knows, Walter, that if he has 2 flour tortillas with honey on it with a core beef hydrate electrolytes, now he's had a big meal 2.5 hours before he hits the mound. But that little bit of carb and natural sugars, he's like, Jeremy, I am dialed in that whole 6 innings, 5 innings, 7 innings, whatever I'm pitching. I have plenty of fuel. So it's not just about what's good for us, because these athletes, they hear what's good for us over and over. It's them experiencing firsthand, man, dear my lifts, I felt like amazing. during my pitching outing. At my bats, I never had weak legs. When I'm running the bases, I'm strong, I'm confident. And that's the part of the process, Walter, because when they're 12 and 13, they don't really understand it.
Right.
When they get 14, 15, and you talked about those older years, man, consciously, you couldn't get them to eat something that's not bad for them. Consciously, they would not drink something that they shouldn't be drinking, because they're like, why would I want to put that poison in my body? I've worked so hard here for these several years of getting my body ready for the next level.
One of the interesting dynamics, I'll just give you a story from my dad days. Once you have an athlete, or, and they're going from high school to college, when they get into college, those athletes that don't waste time trying to figure out, what should my morning look like? What should my afternoon look like? What should my evening and my bedtime? When my youngest son hit college, he was able to surpass others of similar abilities, because he has already dialed in. This is what I eat. This is when I sleep. This is what I get for my hydration before a big game or before my practices. So if you could kind of share, for parents, what should they be focused on, regardless of what stage or what age their athletes are today? What would you provide for advice for parents on what they should focus on beginning today for their children with regard to the nutrition, the supplementation, and the meal prep?
Number one is figured out how many calories your athlete is burning and recognize that always changing. My son right now that's a senior, he's burning 3,300 calories, 3,400 calories a day. When he starts spring baseball 4 hours a day, he's going to be burning 4,000 calories a day. So we got to figure out how many calories your son or daughter is burning in a day, number one. And we've got to always know that that's going to change depending on their sport and their activity levels and that. Number two, get them in a calorie surplus. Your body cannot perform in a calorie deficit. Preferably a 500 calorie surplus is going to help them gain 1 pound a week. 1,000 calorie surplus a day is going to help them gain 2 pounds a week, depending on what they need to gain. Next is getting their nutrition dialed in from their macros. I like my younger athletes, 14, 15, starting off at 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, making sure they're getting enough carbs to fuel their practices, making sure they're getting enough fats. If someone really don't understand that, then I would tell them, look, just shoot for 25% protein, 50% carbs, 25% of your calories and fats when they're younger. If you don't have a clue, then that's a good place to start. And then next is making sure that they're getting their sleep. We talked about this in one of the episodes before. 9 hours of sleep is what I'll always push for. So if a parent don't know a lot about nutrition and they're like, don't have a clue where to start, get them figure out the calories they're burning, get them in a calorie surplus, the right amount of protein, carbs, and fats, and make sure they're sleeping and hydrating. When I go talk to schools, that's all I talk about. And I talk about it over and over and over. They have to be hydrated. They have to sleep. They have to be in a calorie surplus. They have to hit their macros.
I think it's really important for parents to understand now you have the resources that you really can utilize to separate your student athlete, regardless of the age. Now, I have great young athletes that are living down like in Mississippi, down in Florida, down in Louisiana. They've been with me now, believe it or not, since their children were 10, help them avoid some of the pitfalls and the traps that we've talked about. But most importantly, prior to me meeting Jeremy, I would always tell them, making sure you get your nutrition dialed in for your student, and that allow them to understand the value of nutrition and the value of sleep, the better and more prepared they'll be as they begin to grow. And I want to let parents understand anything and everything to do with Corvive. If you want to talk to either myself or Jeremy, in the description below, all of our contact information is there. We're happy to talk with you, happy to help. Now, I want to let parents know, how simple is this? Now, I have a shaker. I do this every single day, and I make sure. Now, I've been taking protein in some way, shape, or form, whether it was from the old days of GNC or the neighborhood health store, and I go get a big vat, and I take my scoops. For me, all I'm doing is I take my packet, throw it into my daily drink, whether that's oat milk or anything like that. For me, it's iced coffee, mix it, and I'm getting in my 23 grams of grass-fed protein. So, Jeremy, I want to end with, How do people reach you if they're trying to get with you with regard to meal prep or just trying to get into your program to make sure that they're getting their athlete off to a great start?
Yeah, obviously they can reach out to me on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, which now is called X. Jeremy at corevive.com is probably the best. And I just, whether someone uses me or not, Walter, I tell everybody, find you a good sports nutrition certified individual that can get your son or daughter what they need to understand. Because the key is it's not to be great at 12, it's to be great at 18. And that's the process.
Bingo. That you couldn't have that parents, trust me when I tell you, when you are looking back, when your athlete is graduating high school, you will think back to those days from 10 through say 15 or 16 before the license days, I call it, when they are interacting with you on a daily basis, and you'll think about the values that they now have instilled in them and will take forward with them, not only to college, but beyond into adulthood. I think it's a great opportunity to get information from such a wonderful source and resource such as Jeremy. Jeremy, I'm really looking forward to continuing our discussions on a weekly basis. I really hope that parents take the time, ask questions. You have questions, put them down in the description below. Either myself or Jeremy will answer them. And Jeremy, looking forward to next week.
Thank you, Walter. Can't wait.